Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight we will be diving into the dark secrets of the posh people in the country house of Saltburn, and then we'll be diving into the dark secrets of rich superpowered people in the elite school of Gen V. But before we get into those mysterious elite institutions, Alistair, what else have you done?
Well, I'm engaging in a project to try and track down some of the films of 2023 that caused waves, or at least got people's attention, in an effort to watch them before the forthcoming end-of-year wrap-up and Best Films of the Year episode. So yeah, in that vein, I've watched a film called Past Lives, that came out earlier this year, that was well received. Yeah, the plot follows the story of a young woman. She's Korean, and her family relocate to Canada when she's 12 years old, and she's got a sort of friendship, burgeoning romance with a boy in her class at school in Korea that gets broken off when they move. And the film follows basically 3 points in these two characters' lives when they meet up, each one 12 years apart. So the point when she leaves Korea, the point 12 years later on when they're in their early 20s and they reconnect via Facebook and have a sort of online relationship. And then, when she's in her mid-30s, when the woman's married and living as a playwright in New York with her husband, and her old Korean friend comes to stay. It's a really nice, sweet, quite quiet film just about relationships, the cultural differences and things like that. It's not one of those films that has big emotional climaxes. It's quite contained and quite small, but it's really it's got a real sense of authenticity. It's got a real sense of this is how people would behave, and you can really get the sense of kind of the strong emotions that bubble beneath the surface. So I would highly recommend this film.
Okay, I don't think I'd heard of this one, so the splash it made hadn't reached as far as me, but I'm not really down with the film, so that could mean nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's made sort of waves in the world of art house cinema, and I guess people who pay attention to these sort of international productions. I think it's sort of joint Korean-American film. It's in sort of English and Korean. I mean, it's not, I guess, got as much attention as films like The Flash, say, big studio blockbuster that we didn't see.
In short.
I mean, this film, I'm pretty sure, is better. Yeah. But we've not seen The Flash, so maybe it's a bit harsh to say that this film is better, but I'm going to put some money on that now. But there's just something really sweet about it that I think I really connect to. There's a lot of bits when even though characters aren't saying much, you can kind of tell the feelings that are going along beneath the surface, and you get a real sense of the emotional weight. When I was getting towards the end, I was thinking, is this going to end in some kind of big emotional scene with people shouting and screaming, some kind of big climax? And I realised, no, it's not that sort of film. It's just going to have a sort of quiet, tender moment at the end. But that's the sort of thing that happens in real life. People don't usually have huge emotional collisions. This film, I guess, is aiming at a sort of strong tenure of realism.
Okay, I could respect it. I mean, if you could pull off that sort of ending, then that can be, I guess, in some ways more powerful, or at least more sad than the big dramatic screaming emotional showdown.
Yeah, I won't spoil the actual ending itself because there are some, surprises, but it's definitely pulls on your heartstrings. It's just, I really like the sort of little subtleties of the characterization, especially showing the differences between Korean Americans and Koreans, just little ways in how the way the characters dress, behave, the things they talk about, their sort of attitudes, really just, I guess, highlights the difference, what the immigrant experience is like.
Yeah, sounds interesting. So do you think this is going to become more prominent as we get into awards season, or do you think it's going to continue to be a sort of cult hit?
I think it'll probably fly under the radar. It might be one of those films that gets nominated for something like Best Screenplay, maybe Best Director. I believe it's based on the writer-director's own life, and she's also a playwright, I believe. So when the Oscars come around, which is when these things get nominated, it might get some things in writing, directing. I mean, it's got some great performances, but also, again, they're kind of these sort of subtle, contained performances. They're not necessarily the ones that the Academy likes to give prizes to. I wonder if it counts as a foreign language film. To be nominated in Best International Film, I think as it's called now.
Does international film mean foreign language?
I can't remember. They changed it at one point to be something like Best International Film. And I'm not exactly sure what qualifies, because there was some debate over whether a few years Minari, which is a film almost entirely in Korean, but made by Americans, is set in America about America.
Yeah. Does that mean British films in English are now eligible for Best International Film?
I don't think so, and I think there's still films not in the English language. But then again, the BAFTAs always have the category of Best British Film alongside their best film. And there's always these things like, well, what is a British film? Like, if you take money from Americans, does that make it a British film?
Is Doctor Who now an American film?
Definitely things that have had like American money in them, or even sometimes like American actors, like Hollywood stars.
Is Saltburn a British film?
Yeah, again, questions. It's one of those things that it's hard to basically say what is British, what isn't British. I think there is some kind of rule, and I'm not sure exactly what it is. It might be quite complicated. I think Saltburn counts as a British film. I can imagine when the BAFTAs roll around, it'll be nominated in the Best British Film category.
Even though it's got one bloke with an American accent in it.
Yeah. You know, that doesn't prevent it from being a British film, having one American actor in it. But then again, it's one of those things that gets complicated. I guess also the thing we should say is there's a difference between American films and Hollywood. Like, Hollywood is this sort of gargantua thing, but also it sort of kind of sits above American national cinema, which is, you know, Hollywood's not really about America. It's kind of about this sort of theme park America. Whereas, like, you know, a film, again, like Past Lives, has more to say about what it is to be an American and what, you know, American society and culture is like, just as British films are trying to say something about British society and British culture. I'm sure we'll get to that in Saltburn.
So you're saying Captain America is an American indie film?
Yeah, that's a Hollywood film, isn't it?
It's got something to say about what it is to be American. Sorry, at this point, I am just being facetious at this point, just to be clear.
I'm sure it has something to say about what it is to be American, mainly that it's awesome. Some
fuck yeah, Alistair, fuck yeah.
It's awesome, but involves magical superpowered steroids. I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen Captain America. I think that's the gist of the plot.
Yes, that's what it takes to get by in America today.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Hollywood films do have things to say about America, either, like, you know, deliberately sometimes or just, like, by accident. Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things. It's like, it's not like science where you can neatly divide things up. The taxonomy of art is more difficult, that you have to have these kind of woody categories, like what is a non-English language film, you know, what is a British film. But, you know, I would recommend tracking down this film. It's quite a sort of quiet, reflective film, but it's got some really sweet moments. If you liked Minari from a few years ago, which I think we discussed on the podcast, then you'd like this as well. It's got a similar kind of vibe, both in terms of being about Korean Americans, but also being about a kind of, you know, very emotional story about family and belonging. So I can recommend this one. Anyway, that's what I've been up to. Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I too have been catching up on something from a while ago. Sadly, not anything from 2023. And also, to be fair, it's a comic, not a TV show or a film, so it's not eligible for our end of year episode anyway. This is Homesick Pilots, a comic which ran, I think, sort of 2021 to 2022. And basically, it's about, well, it's a bit of a genre mash. It's about a teen punk band who end up breaking into a haunted house on some sort of weird dare / disbelief that if they record music in this, it would be somehow more atmospheric or something, only to find that obviously the house is inevitably haunted. And then their rivals follow them in, a bunch of people get killed, and it turns out the haunted house is alive, and it also stands up and walks around and becomes a sort of haunted house kaiju thing, with one or more of the band members now roped in as the pilots of this kaiju. And then, of course, inevitably, as always happens in kaiju stuff, the army get involved, and meanwhile, the band also have to try and discover the secrets of the house and what is the unfinished business of the various ghosts that are also turning this house into a kaiju. It's quite the genre mash, this sort of punk band ghost kaiju thing. It's by Dan Watters and Casper Wingard. Casper Wingard has come up before. We discussed All Against All earlier in the year, which was also drawn by him. This, I think, is his comic before that. And again, it's typically good. Wingard is, I don't know if he's an up-and-coming artist anymore. He may well have arrived, basically. But yeah, he's definitely an interesting artist who's come up in the last few years. He's got a very distinctive sort of neon action manga style, which has sort of hints of 80s retro. Or here he's doing sort of 90s, 2000s retro, I think. This sort of 2000s-ish teen punk bands with names like, well, one of the bands involved is the Homesick Pilots, which is the title of the series, and another one is called the Nuclear Bastards. That's the rival band.
That's a good name.
It is a good name. So yeah, it's a mashup, but it's very elegantly done, and the emotional stuff with the ghosts' unfinished business does land really well alongside the stuff about haunted houses standing up and punching each other.
That does sound really good, yeah. I like the way it's mixing different genres together in quite an interesting and creative way. So is the horror pitched at being generally scary? It's not sort of pitched at, I guess, I don't know, like sort of ironic horror or anything like that?
Yeah, I think it's sort of the typical sort of ghost story type horror, where a lot of what's unpleasant is the sort of dark emotional truths of what's actually driving these ghosts. You know, the horrible things that happened to them when they were alive, or in some cases the horrible things that they may have done that mean they're now doomed to walk the earth. It's a lot of their sort of dark secrets.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I can imagine there's a lot of scope for really like interesting, beautiful art in this, with quite a sort of epic canvas to draw on.
Yeah, Wingard does a really good job of sort of swooping from these sort of big shots of, as I say, haunted house kaijus punching monsters and other houses and stuff, and also the sort of slightly weird, unearthly, monstery ghost things dripping with blood and slowly revealing that the reason they look like that is because of some horrible things that happen to them, which are then depicted in sort of slightly sickly detail. And he's got, you may remember from All Against All, it's got quite a sort of neon pink, purple, blue colour scheme, which works quite well in this again, partly for summing up this sort of punk band vibe and partly just making it all seem quite, I don't know, ectoplasmic, I guess. Sort of glowy and larger than life. It's good.
Yeah, I remember from All Against All the art being really, really good. One of my favourite things about the comic. I also remember it being sort of slightly abstract, which is also the kind of comic art style I kind of like, in that it wasn't like trying to realistically depict these aliens. It was more trying to giving you this sort of impression of what they look like. Is this a sort of similarly abstract style?
A bit. I mean, he's got to draw, like, there are bits where they sort of go inside the ghosts and encounter sort of weird hallucinatory sequences where they slowly see the ghosts' pasts unspool before them and stuff. Obviously, there's also sort of more grounded stuff. Like, it is about, as well as the ghost stuff, it's about these teens who form this band, and, some of them have, difficult lives, or their own problems sort of driven them to form this sort of found family with the band. So there's a lot of sort of more grounded emotional stuff as well. But yeah, Wingard does do a good job of the sort of more abstract, weird, ghosty stuff that they wander into.
It does sound really good. So how long is this comic? Is it like something with like a set run of issues? Is it still going on?
It's over, yeah. It ran for 15 issues. It's 3 volumes of 5 issues each, and that's it. It's a very, very neat trilogy. It doesn't seem like it was like cancelled or anything. Or at least if it was cancelled, they clearly had plenty of warning, because it does very clearly build towards an ending. It's not cinematic in the sense that it doesn't read like a movie pitch. I don't read this and think, okay, these people definitely want a film deal. I think it might be a bit too sort of weird and abstract to be directly adapted. It might make a good sort of anime, but it does have a sort of very straightforward, almost 3-act structure. Like that, basically the 3 volumes do work quite well in this sort of 3-act kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a useful storytelling structure that's used across TV, film, comics, novels as well. Yeah, that does sound like that was the concept, like 15 issues into the beginning, middle and end structure in groups of 5, I guess. And you can subdivide each one into kind of a sort of 5-act Shakespearean structure for each volume, I suppose.
I don't know if they got it down quite that granular, but it does, as I say, read very well. By the end of volume 2, it's very clearly, oh shit, here comes the payoff. Everything's building to a big slugfest, obviously. A big punch-up with haunted house kaijus and other kaijus and other robot monster things. I don't want to spoil too many of the bigger reveals, as a lot of it is, I think, worth experiencing for yourself if you read it.
Yeah, it does sound very good. Definitely sounds like my sort of thing, between punk bands mixing with science fiction and magic. So that sounds interesting. Yeah,
no, it's really good. It got a reasonable amount of kind of acclaim when it was running, but if now that it's finished and you can just do the whole thing, as I say, it does read very well as a sort of single, continuous, quite well-paced story. So yes, if you do have the means and the time to sit down and go through all of Homesick Pilots in a relatively short run, then go for it. It's good.
Next up, this episode, we will be discussing Saltburn, a new film by Emerald Fennell. Oliver is isolated and lonely at Oxford University when he falls into the circle of the popular and much desired Felix. The two form an unlikely friendship, Oliver from a poor background and Felix from an incredibly privileged one. When Felix invites Oliver to spend the summer with his family at their country estate called Saltburn, things take a turn for the darker. Desire, envy, wealth, and lies collide to form a lethal combination. We've seen this film in the cinema recently. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, interesting film. I definitely enjoyed watching it. As others have said, it's very sort of vibes forward. It definitely creates a strong impression of its setting and sort of introducing its characters. It draws you in very well. It's got a lot of personality and a lot of vision in the way it looks. The erotic moments are exactly as evocative and uncomfortable as the creators probably wanted, and a lot of the satirical dialogue genuinely does land. There's a lot of good laughs in this. The actual plot is maybe a bit woolly. It's one of these films that works very well as a sort of series of scenes, but if you maybe take a step back and think, okay, what's the ongoing character development here? How does this all flow together? You might find yourself thinking, I'm not sure it really does. Weirdly, this feeling of sort of a good time, slightly shabby plot is not dissimilar to The Marvels, which we covered recently. I'm not saying these two films are that similar in other ways. This film definitely has more, like, cinematic vision than The Marvels. But, yeah, it did leave me with a slightly similar vibe of, okay, I definitely had a good time watching that. It definitely had a lot of good, clear moments, but I'm not sure the plot entirely stands up to inspection. And we'll probably get to this later, I guess, but there's also a twist at the end, which I'm kind of 50-50 on. So, yeah, there we are.
Yeah, we might drop a spoiler wall at some point if we want to discuss that. But yeah, I think that definitely the style is the thing I like the most about it. It's very striking. It's kind of got some very like evocative, visual pieces. I mean, the sort of country estate of Saltburn itself is kind of used really well as this kind of, especially the huge house as like a sort of sinister backdrop. There's lots of party scenes. Again, the sort of like very hedonistic parties they throw at this big country house that are kind of got like uses of shadows, dark colors and stuff and things like that. And obviously the music, it's set in 2000s. Which is similar to Emerald Fennell's previous film, Promising Young Woman, that also had a sort of retro feel to it. And yeah, there's a lot of pop hits from the mid-aughts, things like Murder on the Dance Floor, Happiness Seems to Be Loneliness, Mr. Brightside at one point. And I think, the setting is partly for this kind of retro vibe, partly because it has to take place in the pre-social media world so that characters can lie to each other without their backgrounds being revealed by Facebook or things like that. But what I did like about it is also, it kind of touches into this dark academia, which is a sort of, aesthetic that seems to be sweeping the internet by storm. Lots of YouTubers are sort of embracing it, and it's sort of really kind of playing into that with this first of all beginning at Oxford and then moving to this wealthy art-filled country house, this sense of like behind this kind of intellectual refined world something dark lurks, and they're kind of bringing out that through tone and sort of vibe is kind of the great strength of the film.
Are there a lot of YouTubers vlogging themselves trying to experience a bacchanalian state?
Not so much like that, but more, I guess, this kind of muted colours riffing on academia and things like that. Yeah, again, a lot of these people are students who are trying to kind of, through going to these like elite universities and the way they dress and the way they present themselves, project not only this kind of elite aura, kind of the world of like Oxford and country houses, but also this kind of sort of old-fashioned aura of, the sort of the 50s or 60s kind of high culture. I'm thinking of YouTubers like R.C. Walden, people like that, and I think this film's playing in as well. Like, again, the sort of style of the characters, especially the wealthy people who live at Saltburn, it's very old-fashioned. It's kind of this sort of old-fashioned world. When the film first came out, I was looking at some of the materials, like, I'm not exactly sure when this is set, because it's kind of got this sort of timeless kind of classic English country house look to it. It could be anything from sort of Evelyn War period through to the present. It wasn't until I watched the trailer and saw like the music and stuff, I was like, oh yeah, okay, contemporary.
Well, contemporary about 15 years ago.
Yeah, I guess closer to our time than to Evelyn War or anything like that. So these are sort of like, I guess cultural currents that the film kind of gets swept up in. There's some, the other big one is obviously, again, nods to The Secret History.
A book that I'm still halfway through, so we're not going to be spoiling it extensively.
No, I'm going to be very careful in what I say now, but I would certainly say if you're a fan of The Secret History, definitely dive into this. Again, it's riffing on dark academia. A lot of the dark academic people obviously make also nods to The Secret History, but, there's references to the Roman god Bacchus. In this film, there's a key scene that takes place by a statue of Bacchus, and that's connected to The Secret History, which you'll know if you've read it. The whole thing's framed as a confessional. There's that element. There's the university connection, this kind of elite academic world. It's sort of going into the lives of these sort of wealthy and powerful people, and there's dark things going on involving death and things like that. There's that similarity. And also the sort of homoerotic undertones that run through both this film and The Secret History, or at least that's the vibe I got.
Yeah, as having seen this film and read, as I say, about half of The Secret History, yes, that's definitely in there. And yeah, there's definitely, especially visually, there's a lot of loving shots of the main posh kid, Felix, who, is definitely portrayed as this sort of object of weird, spiteful desire by the lead character, Oliver. It's interesting because his family they're very funny and they're very entertaining, but they're quite broadly drawn. There's a certain level of sitcom characterization with Felix's family. Felix himself, I think, is quite three-dimensional in a quite nice way, and that he manages to come across as he is, on the one hand, kind of a little bit unaware of or sort of willfully ignoring his own privilege, but he's also well-meaning up to a point. He doesn't seem like reprehensible, he's just a bit oblivious for the most part, whereas his family are largely sitcom monsters.
Yeah. There's quite a small cast of characters for this film. It is focused basically on, Oliver, the family, some immediate people such as some family friends and extended relatives. But the focus of the film is the relationship between Oliver and Felix. And they're the most complex characters and the most detailed ones, are the ones that, as you say, feel the most like real people. I felt some very, natural responses, especially like Felix. The way he responds to things feels like the sort of thing that you'd expect from a human being, which is rather than, as you say, his parents sometimes behave in sort of the ways of sort of caricatured posh people. But I think that the film is really, really good at portraying that kind of magnetism that some people have. Again, it's something The Secret History does well, especially, again, happens at university. You meet these people, you're thrown into situations with people you never met before. A lot of people are someone like Oliver trying to find their way in the world, trying to find out who they are. But then you meet these people who have this kind of incredible charisma. Everyone wants to be around them, be their friends, be with them, both men and women. Everyone kind of desires this person. It's partly because of his wealth, his charm, his good looks, but partly because it's something else, and he exudes that even the other wealthy posh people don't have. And I think it's a really good film about what it's like to be totally ensnared by someone, to the sense you kind of want to be their friend, want to be their lover, want to actually be them, and it captures that really well.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to the twist later. But a lot of the stuff that was really, really had me with this film, to be honest, was actually the stuff in the first, I don't know, hour or so, I guess. I kind of lost track of time when I was watching this, which is probably a good thing. But I think the first hour or so, which is, about Oliver's first meeting Felix and becoming kind of obsessed by him, seeing the way that everyone around him sort of gravitates towards him and tries to please him. And and it is, again, Felix is kept a bit at arm's length, but it doesn't seem like he's doing this sort of maliciously and stringing people along. It just seems like he's, as you say, one of these quite magnetic people. And the relationship between Oliver, who just desperately wants to be included somewhere, and this is quite, I don't know. But we're not going to get too far into my own sad university memories, but it did bring back a few cringy memories from my own life, which I guess is the sign of good material to an extent.
Yeah. I think we've all been Oliver at one point, especially, people who don't have that magnetic charisma like Felix, which is, you want to be in the crowd and it can be a bit cringe trying to make friends and get in with people and stuff. And the thing about Felix is he's quite a likable guy, even from the perspective of the audience. In that he's got this sort of magnetism, but he's not manipulative, really. I mean, he uses it to get what he wants and gets all this incredible stuff. Obviously he's got loads of money, but get things that money can't buy, people's affection. But he's not he's just almost kind of unaware of this effect he has on people, which kind of makes him more likable, because he's not using it to scheme and manipulate people and try to become a career pole climbing politician or something like that. He's kind of almost oblivious to it and sort of generous and warm at times and things. Again, which is getting away from the fact this could have been a film about a sort of manipulative, controlling, nasty, posh person who just abuses people who have less wealth and power than him. And even the people around him, some of his friends who are wealthy, posh and desirable, but not as him, they come across as quite conniving and nasty, because they're the ones who are putting Oliver down. They're the ones who are trying to push him away, accusing him of not having the right clothes or enough money and things like that. But Felix is always really nice about it, which is, again, gets you on side with him as as a member of the audience.
Well, he genuinely comes across at least as wanting to help, even though he sees Oliver as this sort of downtrodden poor person with a sad, tragic backstory, and he's sometimes quite patronising about it, but in a way that comes across as just about well-meaning.
Yeah.
And that stuff works quite well. In a weird way, I mean, and I'm increasingly dancing around spoiling the twist, but in the central relationships, Felix almost ends up coming across as better drawn and more consistently written than the main character does.
Yeah, he does, and there's a big revelation, the lie that I've alluded to earlier that would have been ruined if this was set in the age of social media. And when Felix discovers this truth, he, I think, reacts in a very normal, honest and regular way. Again, films lose credibility when stuff happens, the plot comes up and characters behave in bizarre ways because they're needed to for plot reasons, but it always feels like he's, again, a real person having real responses to things.
Yes, and on the other hand, Oliver, played by Barry Keoghan, played very well. Like, Barry Keoghan's, I think, come up a lot in the sort of, I don't know, people's internal actor ratings and rankings in the last few years. And he's great here, he really is. He's got a huge amount of charisma, even though he's playing this sort of quite quiet nerd character. He's maybe a bit old for the part in some of the more young studenty stuff, but who cares? Yeah, he's really good and charismatic, and he really sells all the individual scenes he's in. His character shifts in a way between scenes, in ways which, I don't know, both seem quite jarring and provide a weird sense of mystery. But Keoghan always sells them in the moment, to be fair.
Yeah, he's really good as the core of the film. He's a great actor. I really liked him in Banshees of Inisherin. Yeah, and also pretty much in everything else he's been in. Yeah, I think that there's a trajectory to his character, which when he kind of has these sort of sudden changes, it can be a little bit jarring. I felt there was sort of like, there was definitely a ground was laid early in the film that you get the vibe with his character that something's not quite right, and the film's quite good at projecting that in a sort of quite subtle way. I can imagine it's one of these films that if you watched it a second time, there's probably lots of little nods that were planted there that you wouldn't pick up until you know the twist later on. Possibly, I've only seen it once, but it strikes me as that sort of film. It does its best to kind of make the twists seem natural. At the same time, there are some surprising lurches with obviously being careful dancing around spoilers.
Some of the more strange and sudden lurches with his character do kind of work with the sort of film it is, because there is a certain amount of, okay, the question in these sort of films is often, is he being seduced by the posh people and the posh life? Does he, desperately want to kind of get himself in with the family and become one of them? Is he trying to, as you say, sort of consume and become Felix? Is he just becoming an arsehole because he's spending so much time around arseholes? There is a certain amount of, okay, what is going on? What is happening with him? And having seen these sort of films before, and there are some, properly weird, disgusting moments, which, again, admiration to Barry Keoghan for committing to them, which sort of press that stuff home. So yeah, it does, I don't know, project a sort of air of mystery and confusion and uncertainty, which is very weird to then assess critically, because you sort of sit there going, well, I was often quite confused what the fuck was going on with that character. Is that intentionality or is that bad writing?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, and it kind of relates to one of my core criticisms of the film, which is that I think one of its flaws is it's sort of in its conception, which is I feel that we're kind of held at arm's length from Oliver a bit. He's like our main character. Like I say, he's very relatable, like the bits at uni of him trying awkwardly to make friends when he's not got the sort of magnetism that other people have. That's all very relatable, and you can kind of see through his eyes, but I still felt we're kept sort of arm's length from him at a distance. That's partly to preserve the twists. It wouldn't work if we were inside his head, knew everything about him. But the problem is we feel removed from him, and he's our eyes and ears in this film. I don't think there's a scene in this film that he's not in.
No, it is 100% from his perspective, basically, yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, we're kept separate from him. And I don't want to keep going on about it, but what makes the Secret History work really well is that you inside the head of this character who gets sucked into this world, and you know everything that he's feeling and experiencing. The Secret History does not work from the perspective of Bunny or Henry or Charles, or any other characters. It only works because there's this character who's outside it who gets sucked in that the audience sees through. And because this film has these twists, it can't put you fully inside Oliver's head, and so that's, I think, leads to sometimes these moments when you're like, why is he doing this, and why, and maybe it's partly because it's a film and there's a limit to how much we can be in his head anyway. If it was a book, obviously we could be in there much more, but it does, as you say, have these bits when you think is this just a sudden change? Why is the character doing this? Because we have this sort of weird distance from Oliver as an audience.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're just going to finish this review without spoiling the twist, or if we're going to go all in at some point. But yeah, as you say, it's to preserve the twist, and it does lead to a slightly weird experience where you almost end up, as we've established, I think, liking the posh character more than the main character. the classic distinction in all films: main character, posh character.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be easy to make a film about rich people being awful. Not that, as a socialist, I wouldn't appreciate a film about rich people being awful, but it would be a more simple and straightforward film. What I liked about this film is it did the unexpected. The obvious film would have been poor kid falls into the circle of rich people, gets invited to their estate for the summer, and it turns out that they're all awful and nasty, and even there's something creepy, super, serial killery or whatever, something between Get Out and Girl with a Dragon Tattoo sort of thing going on. That is the most obvious film. And this film is not that film. The twist is not that Saltburn is full of secret serial killers, or things like that.
At the party, they sacrifice one of the guests to
Bacchus,
Bacchus, yeah, the goat's god.
Yeah, exactly. So, that would have been a more obvious film to make about how rich people are awful and nasty, and there's something completely corrupting and kind of evil about this wealth and privilege. That's a film more similar to Get Out. Get Out's a different film because it's trying to say something about race. It also has this comedic shift as well.
I mean, it is, I guess, a similar-ish vibe to Get Out in that there's a sort of this juxtaposition of this sort of horror thriller angle with sort of, as I said earlier, sort of sitcom level comedy, especially with some of the sort of family characters who are quite two-dimensional.
Yeah, like the Kerry Mulligan character and stuff.
The Kerry Mulligan character, the Rosamund Pike character, the Richard E. Grant father, especially. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're all good in these roles. They kind of give them some life. It's a great cast, but you're right. They're not as well drawn as the main characters. But, and the film does, have this thing to say, is there something evil and dark in this world of wealth and privilege? And as Oliver becomes more twisted and starts to do, as his story gets darker, one of the things I feel the film is asking is it Saltburn and the wealth and the privilege that's making him do this, rather than something in him himself? Is that it? And that's a way of pointing towards this world of wealth and privilege and saying there's something dark here, rather than the really obvious trick of, oh, look at sweet little Oliver sucked into the world of manipulative Phoenix so that his parents can sacrifice him in their bloody occult ritual. That would have been a more straightforward but less interesting film. And despite all my criticisms, my thing I liked about the film most is that it did do that. It did an interesting plot. And similar to Promising Young Woman, which also shoots off in an unexpected direction at the end.
Yeah, I mean, possibly the most frustrating thing about both this film and my reaction to it is that I would almost rather it had done a slightly simpler version of the story where, it turns out that Oliver's desire to be like the rich people is worse than the rich people. And that would have, as you say, been more interesting than the most obvious version. But instead, Emerald Fennell finds a third way to complicate it even further and possibly just makes it a bit too complicated, I don't know.
Yeah.
Which, as you say, leads to this need to keep Oliver at arm's length and not fully get into his character journey, which ends up with a very aesthetically pleasing film with a lot of good feelings and good sort of beautiful shots and interesting character moments, but the plot just becomes this slightly confusing thing.
Yeah. It's not a hugely long film as well, and it's a while before they actually get to Saltburn itself. There's quite a bit at Oxford before, which I like because it sets up the relationships and makes it feel natural. There's nothing, there's some films I don't like when it suddenly lurches from, oh, these people bump into each other, oh, they're best friends now, oh, they're spending the summer together. There's a sort of, they build it up as a realistic, believable friendship, which is why, again, the most interesting thing about the film is just, the relationship between Oliver and Felix. That said, all the good pacing at the beginning of the film is maybe sacrificed for very fast pacing at the end when it kind of cannons through some stuff in a slightly bizarre and unbelievable way.
Yes, and then they really cut back to Oliver's sort of confessional. And it's weird, the twist is explained to us in a very sort of on-the-nose way, sort of again and again. A few episodes ago, we watched the movie Foe, and we gave it a slightly middling review. Just to be clear, this is probably a better film than Foe. But there's a sort of little twist or final plot move at the end of Foe, which I actually thought was quite artfully done. They don't over-explain it. It's pretty clear what's happened if you've been watching the film, but it's not aggressively over-explained. The character doesn't, tell you in voiceover or something what has happened. I'm not going to spoil it because why would I? But yeah. And in this, a character does, for some time, it feels like, just sit there explaining what is happening to us at great length. And it's a bit, I don't know, I feel like I've watched episodes of Doctor Who which respected my intelligence more than the ending of Saltburn.
Yeah, and there's bits when they're kind of really hammer it home where this isn't too much of a twist, but two characters, Oliver's reunited with another character, at the end, by seemingly coincidence, but actually he's manipulated it. And there's a bit when he's sat in a coffee shop typing, and then he runs into the Rosamund Pike character again. And then later when they revealed it's a twist that he sets it up, there's this zooming in on his laptop and they realise that he's been typing gibberish. And I was like, I don't need that. I get it that she wanders into a coffee shop, he just happens to be sat there. Yes, he's obviously set this up. It's not a coincidence. I don't need to be pointed out. And not only was he typing, but he was typing nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I do that when I'm trying to write my comics, It's not because I've set this up to try and ensnare someone. It's just because I'm incredibly annoyed and frustrated. But anyway, Yeah. It's the end explanation was a bit much. It's annoying because it sends me away maybe on a bit more of a downer in the film than the film really deserves. I mean, long-term fans of my work, or well, this podcast, may be waiting for me to use the phrase interesting failure. I'm not actually going to go there because I think interesting failures tend to lose you while you're watching them and you end up kind of sitting there writing your review in your head. I think failure is a strong word for this film, which I think does succeed in doing a lot of things, and as we have, I think, demonstrated over the course of this quite long review, give you a lot to talk about and think about. I don't think this is an interesting failure, but yeah, I don't think it entirely succeeds either.
No, it's not an interesting failure, because an interesting failure, is a point when you lose, your sense of liking it, and then you start asking yourself, why does this not work? And this film carried me right through to the end. But then I did have a sense of leaving the cinema of like, that wasn't a sort of smash it out of the ballpark, wow, that's amazing, I'll go out and tell everyone to go see this right now. Yeah, which you get with some films, like Get Out, for example, was one like that. But it did take me a while of sitting down and thinking, like, well, what is it that wasn't superb about this film? And, there's a few things I've, like, hit on, like, I guess maybe we don't need more films about people being seduced by wealth, and how great it is to be wealthy. But I think it's my big, knock on the film is that, we're just not enough in Oliver's head. We're not enough with him.
Well, yeah, I think maybe it's just not enough of a deep characterization to make the film work. Yeah, because as well as being an arm's distance from Oliver, as I say, all the other characters except for Felix are kind of caricatures, so it maybe ends up being a bit too surface.
It's a beautiful surface.
It's a beautiful surface, and individual scenes are very good. And as I say, I may say that a lot of the family characters are caricatures, but they're still very funny. They might be sitcom characters, but they're funny sitcom characters.
Yeah.
So it's not unentertaining. It's not bad to watch. It's not boring. But as I say, as a whole, maybe not quite there.
Yeah, but I like the fact that it aspired high to do these things, to be funny, to be dark, to be weird, to not do the obvious story of like, look at the evil rich people in their evil rich house where they torture and abuse people who are like poorer and less privileged than them. It didn't do that. It kept you guessing, kept you going in interesting directions, kept you on your toes, kept you hooked. So yeah, it kind of, I don't know, points for effort sounds like a damning with faint praise, but loads and loads of points for effort, I guess.
Yeah. And also, finally, strong marks for critical assessment to the people I heard on the way out of the film, two strangers having a conversation after watching this film full of like glistening pictures of human flesh and other slightly grimmer sexual moments, where one person said to the other, I didn't think it was that sexual, and the other said, what? Yeah, fair dialogue.
This is very sexual, very homoerotic film. Very lots of lovely shots of beautiful young people. Yeah, men and women, but yeah, more men than women. Kind of, I don't know, enjoying the pleasures of youth. I don't know what film that person was seeing, or maybe that person just seems a lot of very, very sexual films.
Yeah, maybe that person has just watched too much pornography. I don't know.
It is possibly the case.
It's a curse of modern society. Anyway.
Finally, this episode, it's another story about dark goings-on at university. We're discussing Gen V, a new superhero show set in the universe of The Boys. This show follows Marie, whose power is that she can control blood. After she accidentally kills her parents and is institutionalized, she's given a second chance at life after being accepted into Godolphin University, a university for superheroes run by media giant Vought. At Godolphin, students must aggressively compete for status and a chance either for a life fighting crime or in the Vought media empire. However, Marie is quickly drawn into the shadowy goings-on at the university when students disappear, there are strange rumours about something called the Woods, and the current ranked #1 superhero, Golden Boy, commits suicide. We've seen the first season of this show on Amazon Prime. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I quite enjoyed this for the most part. It's maybe going to be a similar-ish review to Saltburn, but for the first half or so of the season, I was thinking, yeah, this is actually really good. To be fair, I don't think the plot came apart in the same way. I think it perhaps just got a bit overstretched. There's a little bit of the old Netflix bloat going on here over on Amazon Prime. I think possibly a too little plot stretched over too many episodes. But to give them their credit, it does set up its new location quite well. I think the characters are quite well introduced, and they're all well cast and played by strong actors. There's some very good sort of introductory twists and moments in the first few episodes, and even though I think the last half of the season gets a bit thin and the plot moves a bit slowly, there are some good bits. There's a big twist with a sort of betrayal by one of the characters in the final few episodes, which I didn't really see coming and did actually think was pretty good. So yeah, it's a pretty decent show, I think. Suffers a bit for some slightly Netflix padding, but yeah, I enjoyed this well enough, especially for a spin-off from The Boys, which I'm not sure was entirely necessary. It's pretty decent in the end.
Yeah, I think I had a similar reaction in that I liked it a lot early on, and then as it went on, I kind of liked it less. I mean, I still think it was overall it was enjoyable and entertaining. I felt at the end it sort of didn't make quite as much sense, and I felt also more towards the end they felt the need to bring in more characters from The Boys itself, which I felt was unnecessary because the show was doing quite a good job standing on its own, and then they started just bringing in characters from the parent show at the end, including at the very end, Butcher himself walks in, calls everyone a cunt once, and that's it. So it sort of felt unnecessary when you're doing so well with your new characters. But I did like the beginning. I guess sort of spoilers for the first episode, but I guess it's kind of necessary to discuss the show. But I quite liked how right in the first episode it sets up this number one superhero golden boy and a sort of superhero mentor played by Clancy Brown, obviously quite well known high profile actor. He was in Shawshank Redemption and Dexter New Blood that we discussed.
Two equally important bits of culture.
Yeah. But two things that we both liked. Or at least I liked.
I haven't seen The Shawshank Redemption. It's a classic movie.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to it at some point, I'm sure, in the recommendations. But I like the fact they were introduced and made a big deal of in the first episode and then summarily killed off. And the plot goes in a different direction. That was a surprising and interesting twist. It was so surprising. I thought, like, is this one of those things that's going to be aggressively unwound in the second episode when it's revealed that there's actually, like, I don't know, a time travel thing going on or visions of the future or something. But no, introduce these high profile characters, kill them off. That was surprising. And I like that, and it kind of set the tone for some interesting twists, which at the end maybe twisted too far. And also, they had to need okay, let's get Homelander in there, let's get Butcher in there, at the end when it wasn't needed.
Yeah, possibly. I found the Butcher cameo kind of funny, but it would probably have had more impact if we hadn't had a few episodes where, as you say, a sort of parade of the boys' characters kept wandering through. But anyway, there was a lot of stuff I liked. I think the cast are quite well introduced and quite well sort of discerned from each other. They all have a characteristic. They all play on it quite well, and especially in these sort of teen soapy shows, soft euphoria, I guess. The teens are here to demonstrate their sort of hedonistic nihilism and do drugs and have sex with each other. And that's what they do in this sort of, I guess, stage school type environment. I think that's the analogy they're vaguely going for. Godolphin University is this sort of celebrity school where everyone's competing to be the biggest, most famous up-and-comer, which I think does lend itself well to, as I say, teen hedonism.
It does, and I think it sort of probably captures, certainly I think American universities, probably more so than the way that like Saltburn catches British universities, when there's this, it's very, very competitive, I think, as things like people put real pressure on, there's a sense of you have to strive hard to be the top if you're going to get into those high profile jobs in kind of big American businesses. Like the real pressure. Films like The Social Network show really well. These elite universities, Harvard and stuff, the pressure they put on people, if you want to get into a wealthy career or into academia. And that's kind of shown quite well. Obviously there's like kind of Vought, the big conglomerate mega corporation from The Boys is obviously in the background. It's quite good at showing a connection between universities and business, how they're basically just kind of entwined to the point. And also it's good at exploring how university can be bad for mental health. Especially the competitiveness, unstructured time is not great for mental health problems. And one of the things I liked about the show is that how, there's a lot of things about the characters have, poor mental health. More, I think this is explored better than in The Boys itself. Obviously, the first episode involves the person you think is going to be one of the main characters committing suicide. The main character, Marie, she can control blood. She cuts herself, and then in order to release the blood that she controls, and her character arc is very much learning how to control blood without, needing to cut herself. And that's a really nice plot arc on showing her growing and getting over her mental health problems. Her roommate, her ability is to grow and shrink, kind of like Ant-Man, but in order to grow, she has to eat food, and in order to shrink, she has to purge. And although it's been quite gross in the sort of dark humour that The Boys does well, it is a really, again, good exploration of like eating disorders and the shame and stuff that comes with that, family pressure that can lead to this sort of thing, the social media pressure. It kind of good job of weaving all this stuff in and like making it accessible through what is also like a show about superheroes twatting each other.
Well, I think what we've said about The Boys in the past is that it's surprisingly good about this sort of real-life depressing material and weaving it into the superhero stuff in a way that makes it dramatic and also inevitably a bummer. And it's doing an interesting job of doing that in a slightly different way with these sort of mental health related issues, sort of stuff that particularly affect teenagers and university-age people. And yeah, it's a good way of continuing the boys' tone whilst doing something slightly different. And yeah, especially in the first few episodes when they're establishing themselves and the characters, it does come across quite strongly, but they're doing that, which is, interesting and different. And also, inevitably, there's the boys' slight predilection for tee-hee-hee, teen shock value, explosions of blood and guts. The character Tech Knight, who appears in one episode, which is, firstly, a shout out to the boys comic, in which that character is, believe it or not, even more ridiculous. That's a very the boys moment as well, in that it's both a sort of depressing real life moment about journalism and also a ridiculous joke about a man with a strange compulsion.
Should we put it that way? Yeah, it's got that boy's dark sense of humour, involving like dark weirdness and buckets of gore. So yeah, there's Tech Knight, and it's just kind of just very silly, his sort of bizarre compulsions. There's a scene in which a man's penis explodes. That's kind of very much the boys' sense of humour.
Yeah, they've got some sort of CGI and or puppet penis, which they seem to enjoy getting a lot of use out of. I think it was in the last season of The Boys as well. He says, talking about how you recognise that penis.
I recognise that penis puppet.
Yeah, and the puppet stuff as well is quite funny. Yeah, the thing it imports to The Boys, I guess, is the sort of dark silliness, which at this point you either like or find ridiculous, and or just too much of a overly bleak downer.
Yeah, it's quite bleak, but I feel you just have to kind of like laugh at it, really. If you took it completely seriously, it would be too bleak. You just kind of have to think this is sort of dark humour to accompany the kind of the dark plot twists.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this show, if anything, they're allowing themselves to be a bit more playful because the stakes are a little bit lower with this sort of teen soap opera, interpersonal stuff set in this one campus, rather than The Boys, which has a slightly wider scale, which means they can maybe get away with being a bit stupider or doing things that are slightly more ridiculous than they can there.
Yeah, and also I guess that university is a ridiculous place where people do silly things. Like there's one bit when like someone freezes the floor of their corridor and they're just sort of like snowboarding down it and things like that. There's sort of like pranks that people get up to at university.
Yeah, and it does a decent enough job of conveying all that stuff. And yeah, as I say, the plot gets a bit thin in later seasons, but it's fun enough. The actors are all pretty good, as often seems to be the case with big franchisey stuff nowadays. It's pretty well cast. Jazz Sinclair as Marie Monroe is the lead character, and she was in Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which I watched all 4 seasons of, even though by the end I was kind of wondering why. And she's much better utilised in this than she was in that, where they gave her very little to do.
Yeah, I thought she was a great core for this show. Yeah, someone who's really traumatised by the fact that the first time they use their superpowers, they kill their parents. She's really good at the emotional heart of the TV show. Yeah, I thought the cast was really strong. Lizzie Broadway playing the roommate as well. Again, a character that could be sort of like darkly silly, actually gave her a lot of emotion and a real sense of like this is a real person who's like quite tortured.
The Lizzie Broadway character, I don't know, I guess she's the character who's a bit messed up and a bit lonely and a bit needy, and therefore often in the plot has kind of the role of doing something which you sort of go, no, you stupid teenager, don't do that, that's gonna cause problems. It can be quite a thankless role if you don't write it well enough to actually make it seem understandable that they would do that. And I think it's both the writing and her performance do actually more or less make that work.
Yeah. You can believe that a teenager would do something. So yeah, clearly us as adults can see why that would be a problem. But it's believable at the time. It's not the sense of like characters being moved around like chess pieces made to do things for plot reasons. It all seems like it comes from the character's motivation.
Yes.
And I also thought that London Thor, amazing name, was really good as Jordan Lee, one of the other core characters. Again, I thought a very sympathetic, well-done portrayal of a trans character, but using superhero abilities as a metaphor for that. This is a character whose ability is to change their physical appearance into other people, and was born in a male body, but then through developing this ability to change, decided she's more comfortable living as a woman.
I think she just has these 2 forms, don't they? They just, I guess they is the right pronoun here. Yeah, they just have those 2 forms, don't they? They just shift between those 2. They're not actually a shapeshifter. They're just a shifter between those 2 gendered roles.
I thought in the party scene they went through some other bodies as well, but maybe I'm getting confused.
No, I think it's always the 2. There's the female version played by London Thor and the male version played by Derek Le. Sorry, that's probably not how you pronounce that. And yeah, I think it's just that they can shift between those 2 genders.
Right, that's something I probably misinterpreted.
So I don't know if it's a strict analogy for being trans, really, but I'm not an expert.
Well, I felt there was a episode when their parents visited, and the parents was putting on pressure, saying like, I always wanted a son and things like that, and encouraging them as much as possible to
be in their male form, yeah.
To be in their male form, and whereas they really want to be in their female form and things like that. And also There's a romance plot, which I thought was quite nice between, Jordan and Marie, the main character, and Jordan's sort of adopting the male form to please Marie because, she's someone they're attracted to. And I get this sense of, I think it's exploring the sense of performing gender. People feel the need to adopt gender to please their parents or wider society or the things they want to achieve in life, and that comes into conflict with expressing the person you feel yourself to be inside. I think it was tackling those issues and putting them in a kind of sympathetic portrayal. I mean, that's something that I got from the show. I haven't actually seen on Twitter or on podcasts or anything people who are trans talking about the portrayal of this character, possibility that might be embracing some tropes or whatever that are problematic.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a more analogy for being like non-binary than being trans. I don't know. Again, I am very much the last person to give an expert opinion on this. But it is, as you say, at least an attempt by the show to use the boys' setup and the boys' universe to talk about something that is affecting young people, which is, I think, a good way to use this kind of show.
Yes, and it's a good metaphor about finding yourself at university, which is a similar thing that we talked about in Saltburn. A lot of the characters are trying to find their way in the world. Yeah, mainly Marie, who's been given this second chance at life after being in an institution, after killing people, and the sense that you can be the person you want to be. You can reinvent yourself. The Emma character, the roommate, is trying to move away from kind of being a sort of shrinking novelty YouTuber to someone who's more serious at university. So again, they're exploring this whole thing about, university is a place where you can reinvent yourself inside the kind of context of reinvent yourself as a superhero.
So there's a lot of interesting things in this show. It is definitely trying a lot of stuff and attempting something, I think, worthwhile that justifies its existence as a spin-off. And, even if I think the plot slightly peters out in season 1, I would probably watch the second season just to see what else they do with it.
Yes, I really like the characters, and I think there's more scope to develop them, especially, the core cast of, Marie, Emma, Jordan, characters like Kate and Sam, who also haven't discussed, who are to do with the twist. I felt their characters kind of got yanked around a bit at the end when they needed to fulfill the plot. I mean, it wasn't terrible. It was, I could see where the changes came from in the character's development, but I did feel there was sort of sudden changes are necessary in order to complete this plot that we've got going on.
Yeah, again, similar to Saltburn, I guess certain aspects of a couple of characters were kind of just basically kept off screen and then suddenly revealed when it made sense for the plot, which can and does, I think, sometimes feel a bit jarring.
Yeah, that's one of the flaws, unfortunately. It's one of the things that lead me to feeling it was better earlier on than later on. But overall, I still enjoy it. I'd watch more of the show.
Yeah, as I say, I'm interested to see where else they take this idea. And as spin-offs go, considering when they announced this, I was very much a bit, I'm not sure the world needs more boys. I am starting to feel like the boys itself could maybe benefit from turning towards an ending soon. So whether there's a need for more of it. But fair enough. They have justified their existence, which is the least you can do as a spin-off, I guess.
Maybe if The Boys is drawing towards an end, with possibly its next season, is this a sense of when is this coming out? It's are they just delaying the inevitable end of The Boys by doing shows of other things to put off making more of The Boys itself, possibly cynically? But when I watched it, I was like, no, actually, this is good in its own right. It doesn't need to justify itself as a way just to hold off making more of The Boys. And it illuminates the world of the show, grows it a bit, brings in some of the sort of corporate satire that The Boys did very well. Although I guess, going back to what I was saying about Saltburn, what I liked about Saltburn is it didn't do the obvious dark satire. I do feel Vought is a kind of obvious evil mega corporation that are obsessed with money and marketing. It's not the most subtle satire I've ever seen of big business. Although again, I guess I do like the fact that they're kind of poking fun at corporate America, especially. But that's I guess that's the sort of tone that the show strikes.
I think that's the tone it's inherited from The Boys. Yeah, it's just not subtle.
Yeah, that's very true.
Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence for this fortnight. Thank you very much for listening. If you have enjoyed this podcast, why not go to our website, which, and you may not be able to tell, has been very slightly upgraded since last episode, by going to moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can enjoy our past episodes, old deleted scenes, a few articles. We're getting to end of year season, so I should probably start writing my top 10 TV at some point in the next few weeks. And yep, go on there, enjoy all that, and if you have a nice time, or if you just enjoyed this one episode, why not go to your podcast application of choice and give us a nice 5-star review. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You can also find more of us on social media. You can follow us on Twitter, where we're at MFV Podcast, or you can find us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can also find me on Threads, Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky by searching for my name, Alistair J.R. Ball, or sometimes Alistair Ball. You can also get more of my writing at redtrainblog.com, or you can go to Everything Theatre to see my opinions on Fringe Theatre in London.
And if you want to hear more from me, you can go to nickbryan.com, where you can see details of all my self-published comics, or you can go to, I think currently primarily Instagram and Blue Sky for my social media by searching my name. I'm trying to do Instagram stories slightly more at the moment, so if you like that, if you want to see little slides of what I've been doing, seeing, reading, etc., then tune in. And of course, if you don't want to do any of that, we'll be back in 2 weeks with the next episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, where we will be covering the entire of the 14th Doctor's era in Doctor Who, and we'll be looking back at Scott Pilgrim with the new anime series Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. But until all of that, bye-bye.
Bye.